Free yourself with me. Free yourself with me. Free yourself with me.
Well, Habaragani, what's the news? We're back again. There's been a lot of reaction to the last conversation that we had, Mr. Kelly, about the pilots. I'm glad that so many people are again interested in this information. And so what we've decided to do is just go back and look at some of the facts about how much property, in particular apartment buildings, are granted pilots in our village and school district, and how much it's actually costing us. It is absolutely hard to believe that the information that we're sharing is true, but it is. And one of the people that have really been doing a lot of work around this information is Catherine Gary, and I'd like to give her that credit because I am still using the data that she provided to us a few years ago when she did the research to talk about which properties were abated in our village and what those property taxes or payment in lieu of taxes agreements were. As we talked about last time, the number of apartment buildings that are off the tax roll in Hempstead is virtually all of them. When we looked at this information about 2 years ago, there were 1,677 units, apartment units, meaning apartments themselves, in these 23 apartment buildings that were granted payment in lieu of tax agreements by the town and or the county. The one that really galvanized us then was the Bedell Street project, which was being touted as this major victory for affordable housing by the now defunct Acorn. And it was interesting because their push for affordable housing, along with the group Erase Racism, was really talking about spreading this housing out among the region. They at one point had a march in Garden City when they were trying to get then County Executive Swazi to agree to look at the old DSS building as a conversion project. It's interesting that the compromise was that they would take an apartment complex that was at that time still on the tax roll, very dilapidated, very poor housing conditions without question. But in their dilapidated state, and I think they had lost their occupancy permit or in danger of losing their occupancy permit, this project that was headed up by Mo Vaughn's group was paying $777,000 in property taxes. And what that meant is that if the landlord wasn't making good on that tax bill, the county had to. The compromise was reached with Acorn that they would convert that into affordable housing, and they reduced their taxes from the $777,000 to about $100,000. We broke it down at the time. They were going to be paying roughly $300 in property taxes per unit, and that reduction or that addition of that complex to Hempstead's existing apartments that had pilots brought the total number of housing units in subsidized buildings from 1,600 to over 2,000. Now, what's interesting about that is that the federal government does not allow a municipality to do anything that increases either segregation or poverty in particular geographic areas. In this case, the actions by the town and county do both. they not only increase segregation, but they also increase poverty. And this is significant because 40% of the low-income families in the region live in only 7 to 10 census tracts. And we don't have to wonder where those census tracts are. So that they used, or that the county uses, federal dollars through their HUD and their community development block grants, which are federal funds, to grant these pilot projects for these landlords, means that they're using federal dollars to increase poverty and to increase segregation here on Long Island. That's critical, because what we want to see happen is that these 13 landlords, now 14 counting Move-On, that these 14 landlords who should be paying to the village over $6 million in taxes, but are only paying the village a little more than $600,000 in taxes, to pay their fair share. Period. Pay their fair share. If you look at the census data, what you find is that the income disparity between African Americans and Hispanics in Long Island, Nassau County in particular, in the case of African Americans, it's 220% lower than the average white family. What am I saying? Let me say it clearer. That African American families have incomes and assets and wealth 220% lower than the average white resident in Nassau County. So why are we paying more for less services to house Nassau County's low-income families? It should not happen. It's unconstitutional. And if we don't get ourselves together and deal with this, we continue to commit economic genocide. I feel like I'm rambling, and let me just go back and give you some more concrete examples. I have to put my glasses on because I'm older now and I can't see. What we're losing, first of all, the way pilots are broken down, when a municipality grants a private interest a pilot, which is generally for economic development purposes, the village will get 23% of the pilot amount. The school district will get 65%, and the county and town get 12%. So when they reduced, for the Bedell Street project, for example, when they reduced their taxes, what that means is that the village of Hempstead, instead of getting their $170,438 annual tax revenue, will receive $35,907. The school district, instead of getting its $480,584, will get $100,000, which means they will lose almost $400,000, $379,000. And the county and town, who would get $89,556, will get $18,000, and they lose $70,000. So the disproportionate loss to the village and the school district versus the larger regions of the town and the county is, let's just use the word oppressive, racist maybe, unfair certainly. We will lose, as a village and a school district, $513,000 a year for this pilot. Now what's interesting is this particular pilot was granted for 30 years. So over the 30 years, if the property was never reassessed, right? Because generally, if your tax assessment is like mine, you know, the assessment changes. But over 30 years, what that means is we will lose $15 million. That's on one pilot. Now, if you look at the others that have been granted pilots over the years, like 100 Terrace, like Park Lake Housing or Martin Luther King Drive, like the new, you know, they've tore down the Campbell Street projects and they built some new townhouses that looked real pretty on the outside, but as it turned out, were very poorly constructed, had all kinds of problems, leaks, floods, everything, right? Those properties are abated for decades. So the cumulative impact over time, if you've lived here all of your life, or 30 and 40 years like many people, all your life like me, and we've seen the deterioration of the quality of life, and we've seen the decay of our infrastructure. We look at our raggedy streets, we look at the, you know, now we've put up this cheap fencing all around town because I guess we can't afford wrought iron or municipal grade fencing, so we're putting up cheap PVC piping, fencing all over the place. And it's happening because we don't have the revenue. We don't have the revenue. When we talk about a loss of $20 million per year as a result of these properties being off the tax rolls, this is annual. So that means if we just look back over the past 10 years, if we're losing $20 million a year, $20 million over 10 years. But, I mean, this becomes very, very significant. And I think that we have been allowed to be distracted over other issues, or because there are so many issues that this single issue is being left unaddressed. If you go on the county IDA website, for instance, and look at the projects that they have funded and they've granted pilots to throughout Nassau County, you'll find that no one else is having apartments being given abatements. No one else. All of the abatements seem to be for manufacturing or commercial development. And so what happens when they do give, for instance, Toyota, I think, is one of the places that got a pilot a few years back. But that's being added to these existing apartment buildings. And so there is no economic gain other than the one for the private landlord or the business owner. What we have to do as residents, in my opinion, is come together on a regular basis, all personal, private, petty agendas aside, and deal with the fact that we must form a unified single voice that demands the restoration of these properties to our tax base. 2 years ago, we tried to work with the school district, we tried to work with the village. Mayor Hall's response was a letter to the head of IDA at the request of now defunct Acorn, saying that this was an important project for Hempstead. Why? Why was it so important? It was important because of a petty Democratic Party agenda. That's why. It had nothing to do with Hempstead Village and Hempstead School District residents being treated fairly within their economic, I guess, what can we call this? Holocaust. This does amount to an economic holocaust being committed against us. Anytime you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing, right, you are now diminishing your wealth. In Hempstead, The average homeowner, 40% of us are homeowners. I did check that. I told you it used to be fewer than a third. It's not quite half, 40%. And those numbers are before all the housing scams that have put all these, caused a lot of people to lose their homes. But 40% of us are homeowner occupied. 60% of us are paying more than 50% of our income for housing, which includes our property taxes. We can't grow economically as a result of that. We are taking money from our children and our grandchildren. We are taking money from our own retirements to make multimillionaires rich. The 13 landlords that own these properties do not live here, and they are not suffering from the same tax burden or economic burdens that we are. If we cannot come together to fight this, we cannot win when it comes to improving our village, when it comes to improving our schools, when it comes to being able to better provide support for quality of life of our families. We can't win. And what happens is we end up blaming each other for the condition that we're in. Frances Cress Welsing, in a book called The ISIS Papers, talks about that as a self-hatred, that disempowered people will look at other disempowered people because they're too afraid to look at the real problem. The real problem is generally considered too powerful. So we much rather get in bed with them or make it feel like they will protect us or cut our own personal deals with them for protection, rather than join forces with each other and take them on. That's what I think we need to do. And it gets very insidious. We had asked Erase Racism to work with us a few years ago. We couldn't figure out why they wouldn't call us back. They, after all, were leading the charge to end housing discrimination and school desegregation in Long Island. They were being touted by Tom Swazi as the moral conscience of the county, and we were going to all work together. But as it turns out, last year, guess who got their Businessman of the Year award? Mo Vaughn. Why? Because he is increasing housing segregation and concentrations of poverty in Black and Hispanic communities in Long Island, in particular in Hempstead. He has 2 projects here that I know of, maybe more. So I think we need to come to terms with what our battle cry needs to be and who our adversary is. We are not adverse to poor people. We are not adverse to Hispanic people or new immigrants. We are not adverse to white people. We are not adverse to each other as black people. We are not adverse to Democrats or Republicans. All of these petty agendas need to be set aside, and as a unified mosaic who understands that our unity is our strength, need to come together, pool our pennies, and find courageous and insightful enough lawyers. Because it's clearly a moral battle for someone. If we always, one of the things we found out when we were working with the school district in SOS years ago, it's very easy to get sold out. You have to really trust the people that you send to battle for you. And we should have been working these past 2 years to get this issue into the courts. The aftermath of the the lawsuit in Westchester County was a very good window. The group in Westchester County won their case, or settled their case, once the federal government wrote a brief in support of their claim. And we should have been able to really dig in and get some help with that. It's not too late, But every minute that we don't spend organizing and educating ourselves around this issue is a moment that's lost. And the way we're, losing money, it's like $1 million. We are losing millions of dollars. There'll be another school budget. I don't understand why the board and the superintendent, we gave them all of this data, and everyone's position is there's nothing you can do about it. I think it's time, number one, that we get rid of these people that don't know what we can do because they don't take the time to study and read the law, read the policy, that they don't take time to hire people that care enough to read the law and read the policy, and to develop a plan that will address this. The district in particular, these apartment buildings, children coming out of these apartment buildings constitutes more than half of our school district population. How are we allowing these landlords to make money on these families and not pay their fair share? It's time for this to stop. 20% of Nassau County's African American homeowners live here in Hempstead. And what that means is, a class action suit in itself, just this 20%. If 20% of the homeowners in Nassau County, African American homeowners in Nassau County, are being exploited by the county to this magnitude, there is a lawyer somewhere that can figure out how to make a case for us. I believe we can win. I know we have the moral aspect on our side. And I know in Hempstead, if you're like me, you understand there's not a lot of respect for moral and ethic behavior here. We reward, people for doing, despicable things to children and families. But it's time for that to stop. And the way that we can stop it is, number one, that we become familiar. And I'm going to just tell you some of the properties that are off the tax roll or that receive pilots. 110 Jerusalem Avenue, 130 Jerusalem Avenue, their assessed value was $1.3 million. Their full assessment 2 years ago was $833,000. Their pilot was $47,888,000. That means as taxpayers and market rate renters and small businesses without pilots, we made up $785,000 in taxes for those landlords. Adams Court Apartments, their assessed value is $517,000. Their full assessment would be $318,000. They paid $20,000 to the village. We made up almost $300,000 for those landlords. Hofstra 2 or 3 years ago owned the 7 to 21 Manor Avenue apartments. They've just been granted another pilot. They're being redeveloped, and they've doubled the number of apartments in those two buildings. Their full assessment was $400,000. Their taxes would have been $246,000. They were paying $60,000, and we made up the difference. Now, we have to remember, this is just the village. This is just the village. The assessment for the school district is based on the county assessment. And the district has never, we asked them, the county did not respond to our FOIL at the time that Push submitted it. We asked the district to get that information, and neither the new superintendent nor the current board, Charles Renfro president, Joanne Simmons vice president, Brandon Ray, Gladys Rivera, and Betty Cross. Other than Mrs. Cross, no one even requested the information. I don't understand, but what we do need is everyone to begin to go to these meetings and ask for a full accounting of that. If we could get the information, getting the information is one of the most important things. For years, Glenn Spiritus wouldn't even tell us how much of our property was off the tax roll. I mean, it's amazing the things. And when you tell people outside of here the kind of trouble you have, no one believes you because it's illegal and improper. And it doesn't seem to happen anywhere except in majority-minority communities. That's our new buzzword, right? Majority-minority. Let's call that a conflict. But only in our communities. And I guess it is like the Plessy versus Ferguson case. The black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. Some of this borderlines insanity. And I don't know. I mean, I'm very driven. Sometimes I wish I didn't know. Sometimes I wish I could be like the average citizen and keep my head in the sand and just murmur and complain and point my fingers at other people other than leadership and bite the bullet and suck it up and just act, oh, poor me, poor me, poor me. But I do know, and I'm trying to share it with you so that you know. And I hope it irritates you as much as it irritates me so that we will be galvanized to come together and stand the test. Because as we found out with Push, the forces will come in to disintegrate the group. I don't think those forces, are necessarily physical, but that's another story. We won't go into that. But it's amazing anytime we come together on a real issue, how the attacks begin to happen and all the interests get to the table and everybody wants to take the group in another direction. We need a single battle cry. Restore our tax base. The county and the town must pay the full amount of taxes that are due to the village and the school district so that we are able to provide and afford to provide the goods and services that are basic to establishing stability and a solid quality of life. We need leadership on board, but before that, clearly we need every resident and citizen. We need an economics course to understand how it is that as a result of these practices, we are eroding our assets, we are diminishing our wealth, and we are participants in our own economic demise. We need to organize. I was watching the protests on Wall Street where they're taking over Wall Street now, the protesters. Maybe we need to do the same thing. Maybe we need to come up with a way that we can unify all of this dissolution of the village, consolidation, all, these theories that they're talking about, these things that they want to do, although I can't understand who's behind this because there's no study to say it's a good idea. But one of the things I see that's a very good idea, let's unify the district and the village. And as one municipality, take these interests on to get our money back. In the 3 years that this has come to light, we've lost over almost $100 million in the 3 years because they've been adding more pilots as we go. And remember, this isn't even counting the businesses. Like Toyota can get, who's been here, they don't pay sales tax, whatever, they can get abatements. But our resident small businesses can't. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. So we're not even looking out for our business. If small business development is the leading economic generator for jobs and everything, why don't we have a pilot program for our small businesses? No, whenever we talk about properties off the tax roll, and this is why I know it's a distraction. We want to talk about churches. Churches are not taking $20 million out of our economy. 13 landlords are. We need to be clear about that. It's not churches. It's not Spanish people. It's not poor people. It's millionaires who have these properties, who are supported by a political infrastructure and a philanthropic infrastructure to which they donate our money to keep us oppressed. Something's wrong with that. Something is seriously wrong with that. Please get angry about this. Please commit yourself to do something about this. I've been talking to Tony, and I just love this brother because he keeps it out there. He just keeps it out there. And every time I say, no, I've had enough of moving, I'm not going to do this anymore, you know, he gets me back out here again. I'm sure there'll be some repercussions from this. But listen, neighbors, family, friends, you know, those of you who've been here as long as me, whose parents struggled to buy homes here, you know, with their day's work and their maid jobs and driving those cars to be drivers for the white folks and all of that. Those of you with a history like mine. Those of you that came to Hempstead looking for a better life. The black middle class and Hispanic middle class that have been able to pull themselves up based on the hard work, you know, of our foreparents here. Let's organize and commit ourselves to fighting the good fight. This is an intellectual, moral, spiritual battle. And we need to come together with a single focus. Restore our tax base. Thank you.
Free yourself.